Hey there. Hello. How do you do? My name is Harry Wetzel. Thanks for coming. It's the 80s, darling. Yes, 1985, Sunday night, kind of late. And I'm at a party in Rye, New York. Yes, Rye, New York itself. Yes. And I am on the dance floor with three beautiful young women, three proto Gothic young women. Yes, all dressed in black. They're fantastic. There's a great big tall one named Geraldine. There's a little tiny petite one named Lauren, and a medium sized one named Lisbeth. With her beautiful face and her beautiful German dialect, who is currently the object of my hopeful affection. Yes. Anyhow, we're dancing on the dance floor to the Beatles. We're listening to Come Together. Yes, a song whose title is only suggestive if you think about it that way. Right. So anyhow, I'm doing sort of the broken puppet there, sort of reserved. I'm not flailing everywhere, but I'm doing the broken puppet. And Lisbeth is doing her version of the broken puppet. She's dancing along with me. She's investing in it. It's fantastic. It is. I am crushing on her hard. It's beautiful. So we dance through the song together and we're working off each other and connecting and stuff. It's great. The song ends. And Geraldine says, let's get a drink. So that's a brilliant idea, I say. And we leave the dance floor and go into the kitchen. And there in the kitchen, they are having a lively and spirited discussion about whether Richard Avedon's photographs, the color ones, are better than the black and white ones. Right. And there's Nordic Goddess and Keat and a couple of other eggheads are in the kitchen there just having this discussion. And we go on in there and Geraldine opens up the cooler and takes out a couple of beers. And Lisbeth says, would you like one of mine? And I'm like, yes, I'd love that. And so she says, you like Rolling Rock? And I'm like, well, yes, I love Rolling Rock. And she gave me a green bottle and we took off the lids and toasted each other's drink and had a sip together and shared each other's eyes when we did. It was fantastic. And I said, I'm kind of surprised. She says, you're kind of surprised that it's not Lowenbois or Pauli girl, right? I said, well, actually, yeah. She says, everybody's. I like Rolling Rock. So meanwhile, Geraldine and Lauren had gotten absorbed into the Richard Avedon discussion. So Lisbeth and I just sauntered on out of the kitchen. They're playing some Miles Davis now, so nobody's dancing too much right this moment. And we walk on into the living room, and there's some lovely, comfy chairs and sofas, and very dim, dark sort of lighting. There's a couple of people over here smoking a joint, so we go over and I say, "May we?" And they're like, "Absolutely." And so we pass that around and smoke that joint with them, and and we look over in the other corner there, and back there, there's a couple making out. And we're like, so, so we decided, and Lisbeth says, let's go look at Ashley's room. And I'm like, okay. And I go, and which one is Ashley? She says, oh, it's her over there, the blonde girl who looks like she's from California. And I looked over, and there was a very pretty young lady who looked like she was from California. That's Ashley. And we're going into her room apparently right now. It's a Victorian room. Yes, there's a lovely little Victorian love seat. And there's a big Victorian bed with a headboard and a footboard, very ornate. Not a four-poster, just an intricate headboard, yes. And over in the corner, there's a couple of eggheads having also a lively and spirited discussion about the 1696 window tax in England. Yes, and they include us in the rant. And the one fellow saying, yes, and it was just nothing but oppression because William III was just squeezing more money out of the people. and it was unfair that they would tax windows per house. And it was 2 shillings a window, and some people couldn't afford it, so they would just brick up their windows and have less light and less air in the house. And that window tax went on from 1696 to 1851 when it was finally repealed. Well, the entire 1700s was under that window tax, and it was literally a tax on light and air. And he'd gotten himself all worked up, and he said, I need a drink. And the 2 eggheads said, well, I'll see you all later. And they left the room. And Lisbeth and I are there. We're like, oh, whoa. So she says, let's sit down. So we sit down on a lovely love seat. And we're alone in the room now. And I say, so, what part of Germany? Tell me. And she says, I'm from Munich. And I said, and we're very excited. And I tell her that I'm from, a little town near Munich. And we both think that's pretty cool. We do. And I'm just crushing on her. I can't take it. I'm like the cheerleader with the football quarterback in the 1950s angst teen movie. I'm like, I'll be your girlfriend if you want. I know. And so I'm just looking at her, and I'm like, I'll be your girlfriend if you want. Not out loud, don't worry. But I do say, I can't take it anymore. But I do say, may I kiss you? And she looks at me with a big surprise and a little smile there. And, that very moment, we hear bam, 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 bam on the bedroom wall. It sounds like somebody in the next room is very active. Right. And, and, and we look at each other, and it sounds for all the world like somebody is engaged in erotic activity next door. I know. So, and at that very moment, the radio, which has been playing all along, says, Tonight's the Night by Rod Stewart. Gonna be all right. And we're like, oh my. And my brain is saying, is this an omen? Is this an omen? Is this an omen? And then we look at each other, and then we hear bam, 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 bam. Oh. And then it's quiet. And we don't want to laugh out loud, because if we can hear all that, they can hear all this. So we just look at each other. And we just look at each other. We stop grinning. And then she moves in and she plants a full-on kiss right on my mouth. And I say, oh, Lisbeth. And so we just start making out there. We're sitting there on the love seat. We're just making out. And this goes on for a little while. She's a really good kisser. She tastes delicious. It's fantastic. And then she stops. And she looks at me and she says, very earnestly, she looks me square dead in the eye. And she says, do you want to? And I'm like the cheerleader. I'm like, yes. So she unbuttons her top and her second button and goes and leans into me, and we start smooching again. We are swapping spit. Yes, we are. We are exchanging DNA. Yes. We are osculating, and it is fantastic. And then all of a sudden she stops. She sits up straight. She sits back away from me, and she goes, And I'm like, oh no, what happened? What happened? How do we do to make this go away? I go, and she says, I haven't got my diaphragm. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do for a moment. But I say, but there's other things we can do, my darling. She says, I know. And she leaned in and smooched me. She said, but, and then she said, I have an idea. And she stood up and she took my hand and she went over and unlocked the door, and we went out into the party. And there's they're listening to Gary Newman sing about how he feels safest of all in cars. Yes, and there's Geraldine and Lauren. They're doing the robot on. So I go. So Lisbeth drags me up to them and deposits me right in front of them. And without waiting a beat, she just grabs Geraldine's hand and yanks her away off the dance floor. It's me and Lauren looking at each other. And so I start dancing the robot, and we both shrug, and we continue to dance with each other, doing the robot together. And then at one point, she sort of leans into me. She says, I think you and Lisbeth make a perfect couple together. And I said, yeah. And she said, yes. And so I go, oh, an unsolicited endorsement. That's fantastic. From a buddy. That's great news. Yes, it is. So anyhow, it's not very long before Lisbeth comes back with Geraldine and deposits her on the dance floor and grabs Lauren and yanks her away. So I'm looking at Geraldine, and she starts dancing the robot with me, and Gary Newman's song ends, and then it's Queen singing that it's a crazy little thing called love. Yes, and we start dancing around that. And then she stops dancing, and she leans over, she puts her hand on my shoulder, and she says, I'm really glad that you and Lisbeth can get together tonight. And I'm like, oh, yeah? And she said, yes. She said, she's been here a month and she hasn't met anyone yet. And I'm like, oh, this is auspicious. This is fantastic. And then and she says, yeah, and you can't use my room because Frida and Martine are in there. And we can't use my diaphragm because my diaphragm's in there too. Maybe, she said, you can use Lauren's diaphragm. And I'm like, here I am being shocked and turned on all at the same time. Well, I didn't know what to say to that. And so then she just started dancing, and now we're dancing to the Queen song, Crazy Little Thing. And then it was some of the song went through, and we're dancing around, and I'm just marveled and mind boggled at the stuff that she just said to me. And all of a sudden, eventually, Lisbeth comes back with Lauren, and Lauren's got a huge grin on her face, and Lisbeth's got a sort of a sly, wry smile, and she dumps Lauren off and grabs me by the hand and yanks me back to Ashley's room. All right. Yeah, so she shuts the door and locks the little deadbolt there and turns around and looks at me. Right. And and I'm like, and she puts her arms around me and gives me a big hug and a smooch. So she says, so the noise we heard was Frida and Martine together in the next bedroom. That's Geraldine's room. And so we can't use that room, and we can't use Geraldine's diaphragm because that's in there too. But, she said, and she reaches into her black front shirt pocket and pulls out, but we can use Lauren's diaphragm. And I'm like, that's friendship. And she's like, yes, it is. And she puts it back in her pocket. She says, now, the only thing, we have to find the spermicide, Ashley's spermicide, in the desk here. And so she goes to open the desk, and there's a frantic knocking at the door. And we're like, now what? So she goes over the door and unlocks it and opens it up. And it's Ashley, stunning blonde who looks like she's from California. And she says, oh, sorry, Liebling. I knew you'd never find it because it's not in the desk. I remembered it's in the bureau. And so she goes over and reaches in the bureau. She says, there's 3 drawers down. I knew you'd probably never find it if I didn't get it for you myself. And she holds up a slightly crumpled metal tube of spermicide. Yay! And she hands it to Lisbeth. And then she says, all right, Liebling. And then she goes, you guys, I'm glad you still had your clothes on when I came in. Anyhow, have fun. And she backs out of the door and shuts the door. And Lisbeth goes over and locks that deadbolt again. And she looks at me. She takes my hand and she pulls me over to the bed and we sit down on the bed. Yes. And she looks at me square in the eye, all serious. She says, she gives me a kiss, and then she says, "Who are you? Please tell me. I have to know. I have to know. I want to find out about you. I want to find out who you are because I don't have much time. I'm going back to Germany tomorrow. Tomorrow night, I've got a flight." And I go, why? Is there always some reason why they can't stick around with me? Oh, here we have another one. Great. And I say, well, she says, "Tell me, who are you?" And I say, all right. So I say, all right. I tell her everything I can. I tell her about growing up on Lafayette Street, and I tell her about being beaten my entire childhood, my despicable elder sibling, and my struggle with depression as a result of that. I talk about going to college for acting. I talk about coming to New York here, and and everything as best as I could. And then she told me about her growing up and her childhood and her loving but flawed parents and her college and now her coming here and her struggle with depression. And we had a lovely we talked. We slowed down eventually and we just talked and chatted for a long time. It was beautiful and cosmic and everything. And eventually we had cause to use Lauren's diaphragm. So later, a little while later, when we're in the basking in the afterglow, smooching every now and then, breathing each other. Anyhow, we hear bam, 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 bam next door, and we both just started laughing out loud. She says, "Ah," he says, she says, "Frida and Martine." And so I said, "I think we should give Ashley back her bedroom." So she gave me some mooch, and we got up, we got ready, we got dressed, and I said, "Wait, before we leave this room, I need to get your address and your number. I'll give you mine." And so we did. I took a lesson from Diet the first. I never got her number. I gave her my number, but I never got hers. And it was a result I got mixed up with Diet the second, and that didn't work out right. So I've taken a lesson to try and get their numbers right and their address if you can. So then we went out into the party, and meanwhile, Nordic Goddess and Keith are trying to arrange an exodus to go to the local diner and have breakfast. And that sounds like a fabulous idea. And so a bunch of us do. We go to the local diner over here in a couple of different cars, and I get to sit next to Lisbeth, and we held hands under the table. It was so romantic. And, you know, Geraldine and Lauren and Keith and Nordic Goddess all came, and a couple of other people I still didn't get their names. Yeah, we were all there at the diner. It was fantastic. And after that, we went back to the apartment, and people went their separate ways. It was so late; it was getting early, and so people went off to their rooms and said goodnight, everything, and they said that we could have the big, comfy, by the way, sofa in the living room. There was a huge, comfy, with plenty of room sofa. You could lean way back in it if you were sitting there alone, so two people could very comfortably, and we did, and we slept in each other's arms anyway. It was lovely, just for a couple of hours because we woke up and everyone was still asleep, and it was that blue hour, and we decided we wanted to be intimate again one more time. So we had to be as quiet and as still as we possibly could. We're out there in the living room, in the middle of the living room. Anybody could walk in. So we had to be as quiet, still as we could. And the thrill of possibly being caught any moment, it was fantastic. And we got away with it. And then we got ready and got up and got dressed and started to walk around, and other people were rousing themselves. And then it was a Monday morning in New York, and everybody had stuff to do. And we sat around, we had some coffee, a very brief cup of coffee because everybody had to get going. It was already late. And Lisbeth had to get going, and Geraldine was going to give her a ride, and so they both had to go on their errands. So we gave each other a quick hug and a quick smooch, and looked at each other in the eye, and said, "It was so nice meeting you," which is a weird thing to say after you've been intimate a couple of times. I know. And then I walked them outside, and they got in Geraldine's car, and poof, they were gone. And Keaton Nordic Goddess came down. They said, "We got to get going too. If you got all your stuff, we can just take you to the Rye train station if that's okay with you." And I didn't have anything. So yeah, they took me to the train station. I had to get back to New York. It was Monday for me too. I had cats that night at the Winter Garden. So life goes on. Oh well. Thank you for coming on this journey. I look forward to telling you what happens next, as ever.